Vulnerable customers have been part of the FCA's regulatory kind of outlook for several years now, but really they've become embedded in the day-to-day as a result of the Consumer Duty, where vulnerable customers are mentioned numerous times, and it feels like it's almost impossible to meet the requirements of the Consumer Duty without having a very clear strategy for how you're going to deal with vulnerable customers. So as part of our gap analysis that we did in our preparation for the Consumer Duty, we noted that there wasn't an easy flow of communication from the broker to source around any vulnerabilities that might exist. So what we did was we drew up a list of what we would consider to be high-level characteristics of vulnerability. Now, in saying that, I think it's probably worth understanding that what we would say is a characteristic of vulnerability for financial services may not be the same as a characteristic of vulnerability in normal life. For example, having English as a second language might be considered a characteristic of vulnerability for financial services because so much of the literature is written in relatively complex English. So if that's not your first language, it can just be a little bit harder to engage with financial services products and terms and conditions, which is why it's a characteristic of vulnerability that's quite particular to financial services. So in our quotation system, we have an area where brokers can quite simply tick some boxes, which will just give us a heads up around any characteristics of vulnerability that are known to the broker. And there's some additional free text where they can give us a bit more information if they think that's relevant. How that helps source is it helps us deal with the customer. If we know that there is a characteristic of vulnerability that's been flagged by the broker, it will inform our approach to how we deal with the customer. So, for example, using the same example of somebody who maybe has English as a second language, or perhaps who isn't particularly fluent with English, if we know that before we answer the phone, the agent will already have it in his head that they've got to talk a little bit more slowly, a bit more clearly, enunciate. And often, that's all that a customer needs is just that forethought and just an agent just slowing down a little bit. Often it's the little things that will make such a huge difference to dealing with anybody that has a characteristic of vulnerability. What this does, if brokers do flag, it also helps us report to the FCA to make sure we've got kind of representative statistics, because reporting and evidencing is such a huge part of Consumer Duty, and obviously that can help with the broker's own kind of evidencing of how they manage vulnerable customers by working with a partner that's got a structure in place to help them manage the vulnerable customers.